Hello nerds, and welcome back from hiatus. I went into this break with a lot of plans and goals to write and read a ton of books, and I did not accomplish any of that. I was originally going to title this video something like an unproductive break, but the more I thought about the things that I did do over the hiatus, which was also a break from school and work for me, I realized that even though they weren't really quantifiable things, they weren't totally unproductive for me as a writer. By quantifiable, I mean that I wasn't adding new words to a manuscript or moving books off of my TBR shelf, activities that are very measurable in their results. Instead, I spent my break actually taking a break and refilling my creative inkwell and soaking in stories and things that I enjoy. And I think that taking breaks and refilling your creative well are so crucial to being a creative person and avoiding burnout. So if I wasn't reading or writing, what did I do over the hiatus? There were three main things. The first was that I finally got caught up on Game of Thrones. I watched the first 5.5 seasons earlier in 2018, but then life just got busy and I didn't have time to finish it, so I kind of put it aside, but I finally had some free time and I decided to watch the last 2 seasons finally. Even if you're not a super fan of Game of Thrones, I think it does provide so many opportunities for inspiration, especially if you write high fantasy. There's the huge intricate world building and the complex plot and the characters. There are a lot of really good writing lessons to be found in both the TV show and the books about subverting reader and viewer expectations and long-term payoff of character arcs. There are even lessons to be learned in the things that the show maybe doesn't execute so well. Really, watching Game of Thrones makes me want to write something that big and complex and long, and maybe one day I will feel secure enough as a writer to attempt something like that. Second thing I did over the hiatus was listen to a bunch of episodes of the Good Place podcast. You may know that The Good Place is one of my favorite TV shows. I think it's one of the best TV shows of all time. It just does so many things so well, and I don't want to get into it because if you haven't watched it before, I don't want to spoil anything because it's really a show that you have to watch and fully experience without any expectations or preconceived notions of it. The Good Place podcast is produced by NBC. It's hosted by one of the actors from the show, Mark Evan Jackson. He plays Sean, if you've seen it. He's also in Brooklyn Nine-Nine as Kevin, if you're familiar with that. Each episode of the podcast focuses on a specific episode of the show, and Mark Evan Jackson interviews one of the other actors and usually one of the writers or some other member of the crew, and it's a really in-depth look in how the show is made. As a creative person and a storyteller, it is such a fascinating podcast to listen to, especially the episodes where he interviews the creator of the show, Mike Schur. There are a lot of discussions about storytelling and plotting and execution. There's a really great moment in one of the episodes with Mike Schur, I think, where he says something about how even the best idea can be ruined without proper execution, and that really hit home for me. So watch The Good Place if you haven't already, at least the first season, and then after you've watched it, listen to the podcast because there's a lot of really, really great insight into how to create a complex, meaningful story. And the third and final thing that took up a lot of my time over the break was that I started playing The Legend of Zelda: Twilight Princess. Video games are a new form of storytelling for me. I did not play them much as a kid, but last year I played the newest Zelda game, Breath of the Wild, and fell absolutely in love with it, found so much inspiration as a storyteller and a creative person, so I decided to try another one of the games. Twilight Princess is different in a lot of ways. It doesn't have the big open world that Breath of the Wild has, but for someone interested in story, it's great because it has a more linear, structured storyline to it. I love in these games seeing how world and character and plot are built because it's very unique from other forms of storytelling, but also shares a lot of things in common as well that I feel like I can learn from as a writer. And especially with the Zelda games, it's interesting because each game kind of exists separately from the others. You don't have to play them in order to understand them. It's kind of building a very similar story and very similar characters over and over again in different ways. So it's fascinating to see those different methods and different versions of similar characters that the storytellers create. Also, Twilight Princess, as well as a lot of the other Zelda games, is a classic quest story, and I love a good quest. The first book I ever finished writing all the way through was a quest book, and I'd love to go back to it one day or maybe write a different quest story, so it's been fun experiencing something that really hits those classic story points that a quest has. Anyway, that's what I did over the hiatus and over my break from school and work. It wasn't writing and there wasn't much reading, there was a little bit, but it's still, I feel like everything I did was valuable to me as a writer and as a person who loves and creates stories. That's it for today. I'll see y'all on Sunday at 7:30 p.m. Eastern Time for our live chat now that we're back on a regular schedule.